Ben, from Australia's perspective, I guess the key thing is getting a clear answer on the future of AUKUS. What's being said in Canberra?
That's exactly right, Paul. So there was big exhalations this week after some very long pent-up holding of breath after Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the incoming Secretary of State, announced that he would be a strong supporter of AUKUS during his confirmation hearings. And that's the most high-profile, strongest support for AUKUS that we've seen from the Trump administration so far. So that answered a lot of questions, but we still haven't heard the president himself, President Trump, say that he supports AUKUS, say what his feelings are about it. And a number of the major sort of milestones will take place during or just after his presidency. We're expecting to see visits by US nuclear-powered submarines through Western Australia in 2027, at which time Mr. Trump will be president. And then just after he leaves the White House by about in the early 2030s, we'll see the sale of the first US nuclear-powered Virginia-class submarines to Australia. So he'll have a lot of say over how this deal comes to pass.
Ben, how deep can the conversations be between the new Trump administration and Australian leadership right now, when Australia is also headed to the polls in May and could see a huge reshuffle in government?
Yes, it's a very good question, and we're already seeing both sides argue over who would be the best placed to speak in Australia's interests with Donald Trump. But already we've seen some reach out between the two sides. We have seen Ambassador Kevin Rudd reaching out to the Trump camp for a number of months. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese spoke to President Donald Trump back when he was president-elect, shortly after his win, and Donald Trump told the Prime Minister that they would have a perfect relationship. So he's rolled that out many times. And finally, Foreign Minister Penny Wong became the first Australian Foreign Minister to attend a US inauguration today, when she attended President Donald Trump's second inauguration. So already we're seeing tentative reach out. Albanese has said he won't meet with Trump until a potential Quad meeting later this year. So quite a way to go yet. And that could be, in fact, it's almost certain to be after the Australian election. So it could be that Prime Minister Peter Dutton ends up meeting with Donald Trump. We'll have to see what the Australian result is.
All right, Bloomberg's Ben Westcott there in Canberra. Well, Australia's official National Day is coming up next Monday, and with it, the annual debate about whether the timing is right. January 26 marks the landing of Britain's first fleet in Sydney Cove in 1788, and this is regarded by many indigenous peoples as Invasion Day, or the beginning of colonisation, dispossession and discrimination. And that has led to protests and calls to change the date of the national celebration. Well, let's discuss this some more, and whether the mood is shifting, with Rachel Busbridge, Associate Professor of Sociology at the Australian Catholic University. Rachel, thanks so much for joining us. Can you give us a sense of where public opinion stands on Australia Day right now, and whether it should be a day of national pride or a day of national shame?
So there are effectively two positions on the Australia Day. One is a position which you've identified, which is of changing the date. And so the argument underlying that is that for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, January 26 represents a day of colonisation, dispossession, invasion, all of those sad and traumatic things. The other camp is effectively that the status quo is fine. January 26 is an appropriate day on which to celebrate. Over the past 10 years or so, we've seen that this movement to change the date has garnered some traction across Australian society. So there have been increasing instances of, for instance, local councils that have elected to not hold events on January 26, alternatively to replace them with something else. And we've also seen a number of large national bodies like Cricket Australia or Triple J also electing not to do things on January 26. So I'd say in the last 10 years, there's been a bit of a groundswell towards changing the date. But what's been quite marked in the last year is that there appears to be a little bit of a backlash to this movement to change the date. Remains fairly small, but we're just seeing small little signs like, for instance, some local governments which had previously made decisions on not celebrating on Australia Day or doing something else on January 26 have now reversed their decisions. So we seem to be, in a moment of a little bit of backlash.
Yeah, and we did, of course, have the Voice to Parliament referendum in 2023, and that failed. It lost in all of the states as well as the popular vote as well. So if the date were to be changed, surely that would be political suicide for any party that attempted it.
Yeah, well, I certainly think that the no vote in the Voice referendum is a major factor in this kind of backlash. If anything, what it has signified is a move away from reconciliation in the public sphere in Australia. And it's also in some ways unleashed, I suppose, an anti-reconciliation form of politics from certain constituencies that have targeted things like welcome to countries, the flying of Aboriginal flags and things like that. Yeah, so it's a significant shift.
Right. But Rachel, going back to you, let's talk a little bit more about what this day actually represents and how businesses are also trying to navigate this sensitive topic.
Yeah, well, I don't think there is one particular stance that businesses are taking on this issue. Some businesses, for instance, are allowing people to work on January 26th and take the day off another time of the year. Others are going about it in different ways. Obviously, the biggest event that happened recently was the Woolworths reversing its decision not to have Australia Day paraphernalia in its stores this year. Look, there's many views on this, but I think what is positive is that it's telling us that businesses, whether they're small or large, are having serious discussions and conversations about, I suppose, national history, their role in the community, and particularly their role in things like reconciliation and so on.
Do you see perhaps the Overton window on this whole debate moving somewhat? You mentioned that there has been something of a realignment of the public back towards national pride, particularly after the failure of the Voice referendum. Considering Western politics seems to be lurching to the right at the moment, is there no longer any shame in waving the flag?
There certainly is a significant rightward push in public discourse, and we need to take that into account. There's particularly been a hostility to what's perceived as diversity, equity and inclusion, or DEI, initiatives recently. Having said that, I think we also probably can't overplay it too much. The reality is that we're in a cost of living crisis, and this is the material conditions which are enveloping a number of societies and not just Australia. And what we tend to find in these types of situations is that people become less concerned about symbolic issues and more concerned about material things. So a softer interpretation might be to say that currently there are other issues which are more pressing for many people in the Australian public.
All right, Rachel Busbridge, Associate Professor of Sociology at the Australian Catholic University. Now, we've got more on Australia ahead every Tuesday, 11:40 a.m. if you're watching in Sydney. That is 8:40 a.m. in Hong Kong.